Hello, it's Paul Driscoll here, aka The Drisk, from the RGDS podcast. And this is me continuing my series of the best game of a letter arcade edition. And this is for the letter R. Now, this is a series where I imagine per letter on a system, if I could only choose 5 games for that letter, what would they be? So I'm not coming at it from the most historically important or most beloved games by the many, but what 5 games would I choose today if all others disappeared? Then, of course, I will give loads of honourable mentions of games in this letter also worthy of your time to try. And boy, does a letter R have loads and loads of games, with this being a really tough one for me to choose from, because there's just so many amazing arcade games for this letter. Anyway, as mentioned, this series is just a bit of fun, and it's just an excuse to highlight some awesome games to try next time you're staring blankly at your fully loaded emulator device. Now, hopefully there'll be ones here mentioned new to you, or ones that you might have forgotten. And if it encourages you to play through some of these fab games again, then for me that's job done, because that's what it's all about. Because it's all about discovering new games to you and rediscovering games that you perhaps forgotten. Now, as always, let me know in the comments what 5 games you would have chosen, as I'd love to hear. As you know, you can't know every single game, and although I try my best, there's many games out there that I probably haven't mentioned. So getting comfy as I take you through the fantastic games in the letter for the letter R in the arcades, because this is going to be a big video with so much to cover. So strap in, as this is going to be a long episode. Okay, for my 5th choice, I had lots of switching around with what my 5th choice would be, but in the end I decided on the game Rastan, or Rastan Saga as it's better known in Japan. Now, there's actually some subtle differences between Rastan Saga. It has more storylines and things like that, but overall they're the same game really. But if you were going to choose, Rastan Saga is probably the better one to choose from. Now, this was released in 1987 by Taito, and it has you play a barbarian warrior with a mighty sword. Now, it's clearly influenced by Conan the Barbarian. Yes, that film with Arnold Schwarzenegger. But I can see why this was so beloved back in the day, and why I love it so much, because it's got gorgeous character designs by Toshiyuki Nishimura or NAMCO. It's a bit easier to say. He's better known as NAMCO. Now, he was the person behind such games as Viewpoint and the characters of Kiki Kai or Pocky and Rocky, as we like to know, and also Ninja Warriors as well. And like with those games, he did the same with Rastan, with vibrant colours that really elevates the games, and great gameplay still further, that I think just draws me in, and that's why I love this game so much. Now, also of note is the awesome music by Naoto Yagashita. Now, he's the guy who did the amazing Chase HQ music, Ninja Warriors, Darius 1 and 2, some amazing tunes there. And again, with Rastan, he perfectly captures that fantasy setting with rousing music that pulls you into the game. Now, the game itself has 6 nicely varied levels, and the way you can pick up weapons as you go through, and there's a multitude of different monsters and characters that you go up and fight again. There's lovely variety in the game, and it's wonderful that Rastan Saga is in Arcade Club in Bury, so I've been able to play it on real hardware, which is wonderful, because I knew it better from the home ports, particularly on the Spectrum back in the day. Now, it's also on the Taito Legends pack, the first one on the PS2 and Xbox era, and it also appeared on Taito Legends Power Up on the PSP. I miss those compilations, and I really wish that Taito did more generous collections. I mean, the new ones, they're getting better. They're on the second one, but they're quite stingy really with the games that they give that on the current gens. But as you can see, it emulates perfectly in MAME here, and yeah, it's just a great fun. It's one I always go back to, and I just never tire of, and it's just a fab game and a great start to the 5 choices. Okay, let's go on to my 4th choice, and I've decided for the Data East Classic, released in 1988. Yes, of course, it's ROBOCOP. Now, of course, this was based on the film that did huge gangbusters, and it was a great movie tie-in. And the gameplay here is actually quite simplistic, with you just going left to right shooting everybody. But I think what sells you on the game, and the reason that it's number 4 on my list and so beloved by so many people I know, that I think it's the opening level, really. The graphics of Rundown Detroit is brilliant. The ROBOCOP music playing in the background, then coming up again across the Ed 209 robot. It's just so much fun. And likewise, it's you've got the speech of of RoboCop reading out his directives. I can see why this was so hugely popular. It was such a good version. Of course, Ocean managed to take the rights. I mean, Data East were basically licensed from Ocean, and part of that, Ocean very cannily was able to do the home ports, and they did fantastic home ports. They've added some extra things. You've got the shooting range that you get in the arcade, but they also added the cool photo fit level, like bonus level where you make up the face, which bizarrely, that's not in the arcade game, but it's great playing it in the arcade. It is its home, and it's one that I always make a beeline to, because thankfully, yes, it's another one that's an arcade club in Bury, so I always go to the RoboCop. I just adore it. But as you can see here, it emulates perfectly on MAME. Also, some of the home ports are worthy of mention. The Spectrum one is particularly really good. The C64 one's not bad. I actually love the Game Boy version. That's one of my real favourites. I think it's done by the same team that made the Spectrum version, but they actually did it for the Game Boy, and it's got a lot of the same music, but actually the Game Boy ironically had more powerful hardware, so despite it being black and white, it's a great version. But overall, nostalgias and memories, I just had to choose this for my 4th spot, even though I will admit that the subsequent levels after that initial first level isn't as good. That's probably why it's lower down my list. Actually, once you get through the first level, the level design is, I think, a little lackluster, in my opinion. But still, I definitely think it was right to choose it for my 4th spot, for me personally. Okay, let's go on to my 3rd choice, and this may surprise you. It's a lesser known one, but I've chosen Rodland by Jalico, released in 1990. This has you controlling Tam and Rit, 2 fairies, and they wave their wands around to bash a wild range of cute beasties and creatures from 40 screens to rescue their mum and dad, because there's the subsequent levels of the pyramid level sections where you're rescuing your dad. Now, I think the reason I chose this game is because of the amazing home ports. The Amiga and ST in particular had fantastic, almost arcade perfect home ports, and I just played it to death there, so I have so many fond memories. But it's wonderful to play the original arcade version of which it's based, which basically the same as the home ports, just slightly crisper graphics really. If you never played it, this game's very reminiscent of Bubble Bobble. You just go around and you capture the enemies in your wand and bash them from side to side, and then that gives you a pickup that you can use, which may kill other enemies, like a missile that fires. But one of the cool things is the extra element. If you collect the flowers on the level, then it goes to extra mode, and the idea with that is all the characters turn into this weird sort of cute walking plant thing, and if you collect those, capture and kill those, it gives a letter rather than a power-up, and if you spell the word extra, you get an extra life. So yeah, I mean, Rodland is a wonderful game, and one that I always adore. So I think it's one that a lot of people don't know of, so I think it's great to sort of shout it out to you as well. Now, on the home ports, the advertisement ran with the, I think, hilarious tagline, "So cute it will make you puke." It's a different time, I guess. And it is undeniable how bright and colourful and cute the game is. I mean, the enemies, you almost don't want to kill them because they just look so damn cute. And today I think it's one that I always put on, like if there's like a people coming over and they want to play on the arcades, kids and things, I always put Rodlan on because it's bright and colourful, it's 2-player, so it draws a lot of people in. Now, this is one, as I mentioned, the Amiga and ST ports are great. It did appear on the Game Boy and places, but to be honest, it's the only decent ports at the home is the Amiga and ST in my opinion. But as you can see, MAME runs it perfectly here and it's well worthy of your time. Sadly, Arcade Club doesn't have this gem available to play, which I would love if Arcade Club in Bury or anywhere else they consider getting the PCB for this, because I would adore to play it on real hardware, but a boy can dream. Right, okay, so shall we go on to my second choice? Now for this I've chosen another absolute classic, and it is Tato's classic Rainbow Islands. Now technically this is a sequel to Bubble Bobble. It has Bub and Bob now back to their human form, and you go on another quest to overthrow all the enemies that have taken over the Rainbow Islands where you were dealing with Bubble Bobble. Now this time Bub and Bob don't actually play together, it's not a co-op at the same time, you're actually taking it in turns, and really it's a whole different concept to this, with now you use rainbows as bridges and you have to get to the top of the stage before the water rises, so that's your timer, more and more goes underwater. As you pick up power-ups you get more magic rainbows, so you get multiple, making bigger bridges, and you also use the rainbows to capture enemies, so you can either hit them directly, in which case it will kill them, or typically you do like the rainbow above them, and then when you jump on the rainbow and break it, that actually is how you destroy them, so similar to popping the bubble of Bubble Bubble. Now the game is like its predecessor, it's chock full of secrets, there's scorings, there's pickups, and it is a pure joy to play, and there's real nice variety with each level being completely different with its own boss, and it keeps driving you forward. Also of note is of course the catchy Somewhere Over the Rainbow tune playing, which sadly doesn't appear in the later ports because obviously they didn't have the license for it, or they didn't renew the license for it. I suspect it's the former, given the period of this coming out. I think one of the reasons it's so beloved, this game though, is the amazing wide range, wonderful home ports. And all of them are good. I mean, for me, the Amiga version is the one I remember most fondly. But everything from, the NES, the Master System, the Spectrum had a fantastic one. Commodore 64 was amazing. One that I think is worthy of note, though, is the Mega Drive version, because this actually included the extra version, which was a spin-off Rainbow Islands that was done for the arcades as well. But you get the original version as well. Now, what is it? The extra version's like a tougher game with less bright colours. Bizarrely, Tato thought that by making it slightly darker, like black screen instead of blue skies, it would appeal more to boys. Bizarre, but it's there. It's to enjoy. Of course, moving forward to later times, the Saturn and PS1 double pack of Bubble Bubble and Rainbow Islands is a fantastic way to play the arcade version. And of course, it appears on the Tato Legend collection. My word, what a collection that is! Although with all those versions, they didn't have the Over the Rainbow song because of licensing. But the other song is replacing it is perfectly good and serviceable, and it's a nice variant to have. You don't miss it as much as you think you would. But as you can see, MAME runs it perfectly, and so therefore, because it's got the original tune, it's probably the best way to play it. Thankfully, yes, Arcade Club also has this game as well, so I always make a beeline to this one as well. There's so many fantastic games there. Right, okay, so we go on to my first choice. Now, for this, I decided to choose NAMCO's 1995 game of RAVE Racer, which is actually the third in the series of Ridge Racer. Now, of course, Ridge Racer is the one that I have all the nostalgic memories of, and I still adore it. But it's undeniable that the sequels was essentially the same game with slight tweaks and additional tracks. So by the time you got to the third game of Rave Racer, you have 4 tracks, but the same addictive gameplay, just with some additional like life improvements to the gameplay to make it even better experience. And of course, by the time you got to Rave Racer and even the sequel, I guess, or Ridge Racer 2, it also let you connect up multiple cabinets. And I would love to see, I mean, thankfully in Arcade Club, yes, again, they've got 2 side by side that you can drive, but you could connect up loads of these cabinets and have a full-on experience. I would love to have experienced that back in the day. And Ridge Racer is one of my favorite series. I mean, I love everything, but probably Ridge Racer 7 or Ridge Racer 2 on the PSP are probably my favorite of all of them. But Rage Racers are definitely special, and it's bizarre that it never saw a home release. You see, Rage Racer on the PS1 is not Rave Racer, just a very similar sounding name, but it's different tracks. Now, thankfully, the PSP version of Ridge Racer does include the city and mountain tracks, so the extra tracks that you get in Rave Racer, and they call them Midtown Expressway and Green Peak Heights. So you can at least play these properly in the home. But you can see here that MAME does a pretty good job of emulating, although you do need a half decent system to sort of run this level of games. I'm not just sure what it is about Ridge Racer that I love so much. Part it's the funky, mad music that just sounds so unique and interesting. Of course, the great drifting. It's perfect arcade handling that I just adore. But for me, Ridge Racer series, but going from the first, it's the pinnacle of arcade racing in a lot of ways. I mean, I think Outrun 2 actually beats it to that level. And that might be sacrilege to a lot of people, but that's personally how I feel in terms of, I guess I'm a sucker for drifting style of arcade racing. And I find it so sad that NAMCO have put this series to the weeds when, I just think a retro collection or remaster of all the tracks would do so well. I mean, thankfully you can play Ridge Racer 6 on modern hardware. It's a 360 game. In Europe, unfortunately, you can't buy it from the store, bizarrely, but you can buy a physical 360 Ridge Racer 6, which is a pretty cheap game, to be fair. And you can put it in your new Xbox One and it will work. And it will upscale things in terms of the frame rate. So that's a great way of playing it. And also Sony Store, the Plus Pass Premium has the PSP version available as part of the premium collection. And that's a great way because that does have remastered tracks and a wide selection of tracks from all the previous Ridge Racers. Now, personally, my favourite is Ridge Racer 7 of the series. That was the pinnacle on the PS3. I don't think they ever bettered it, and it's just a shame that that's the case. It's definitely one that I would love NAMCO to look back to. Failing that, of course, the arcade 1-up looks absolutely amazing. There is a Ridge Racer arcade 1-up. I would love to own it. I just like being married, and I'd probably get divorced if I came back with a arcade 1-up and put it in the corner of our very limited apartment with limited space. But sadly, I'll have to contend myself with both Rave Racer and Ridge Racer. Yes, playing it on Arcade Club, they're both there. Thankfully in Bury, but it has them both, and it's great that I can at least get my Ridge Racer fix on real hardware. It's wonderful to play. But fingers crossed, NAMCO, please consider doing a Ridge Racer game again, or a compilation. I would love as many, I'm sure, to see it again. Okay, those were my top 5 choices, and I'd be really interested in the comments what you would have chosen. Now, to give you some ideas, of course there is loads of games that I admit are amazing and historically important that I didn't include, and some as I go through them, you'll be thinking, my God, why didn't you include that? But at the end of the day, you have to choose what's personal favourites to me. I'm not saying they're the best. I'm just saying that they're the ones that I would have chosen. But hence why I'd be so interested to hear what you mentioned. But let's go through all these honourable mentions because there's an awful lot. So first, let's do the big hitters. and these are amazing and well worthy of your time. Firstly, you got Robotron 2048, released in 1982, and of course made by Eugene Jarvis of Defender, Stargate, Smash TV, and Cruising Games. And of course, he's the co-founder of Raw Thrills. I mean, I love this guy. He's just produced so many classics that I love. I just love his style of game. And for this, with Robotron 2048, him and Larry DeMar, they worked on multiple of these games that I mentioned, as they did with this. And it's a real classic, being the twin stick shooting, one that always comes first to mind for most people, and it's is one of the best. Now, I admit this was on my number 5 for a lot of times, but after a bit of thought, I realised I get too stressed playing it, which is a nice way of me saying that I'm just too much of a wimp playing this game. I'm just not good enough, and I die and I get frustrated. But I do admit this is an amazing game, and one that I do enjoy in short bursts. I mean, the sound effects are just so arcadey. If you wanted to capture what arcade games are, the sound effects of Robotron 2048 would be it. Now, another classic, many of your lists I'm sure, would be the awesome shooter R-Type. Now, this was released in 1987 by IRAM, and it was a huge hit in both the arcades and the home ports, and it's easy to see why, with HR Giga-inspired biomechanical enemies and clever upgrades and force pods and changing your shooting patterns and powering up your blasters. It had a lot of innovative features. So why is the most famous horizontal shooter not on my top 5 for this letter? Well, again, I think it's because it frustrates me as a game, because I'm terrible at it. I find I really struggle with the closed maze-like levels and for me, brutal difficulty. I just can't get better at it, no matter how hard I try. And I know that's me being a wimp here, but it is a masterful title, but that's why it wasn't chosen on my list. Now, of course, such a popular title as this, it also got sequels. There was R-Type 2, released in 1989, and that again saw some amazing home ports. And I think it's easier to play. I do actually like R-Type 2 more. But my favourite, actually, is the third and final R-Type game, in the arcades at least. Now, this was called R-Type Leo, and it was released in 1992, and it's a different team in IRAM to the first two. This adds new weapon systems and more variety to the levels, and I have a total blast playing this game. I do like it. Now, another big hitter, of course, as I mentioned, I chose Rave Racer, but I'd admit, as I admitted earlier, my nostalgic heart will always be with the first one, Ridge Racer. I mean, it was so groundbreaking. Released in NAMCO in 1993. And, this, along with Daytona, was the first racing game to use texture mapping in cars and tracks. I mean, when you consider that Virtua Racing came out in 1992, yes, just a year before, and you look at the visual difference of what Ridge Racer and Daytona were doing, this was such a leap up in the visuals, and it just blew everyone away at the time. And of course, the PS1 really faithful port blew everybody away as well, and was a large reason that PlayStation did so well, I think. Now, Ridge Racer is one of my favourite racers of all the time. It's got perfect fun drifting mechanics, that summer blue sky visuals, and it just is awesome to play. And likewise, Ridge Racer 2, released the following year, 1994, is a great update to that first game. This added new things. There's a rear view mirror added. There's night versions of the levels. So it's a worthy update, just a twinge of update. And then, of course, Rave Racer, which added some additional tracks as well, which we mentioned as one of my choices. Now, another racing game that I have a lot of time for is Road Blasters, released in 1987 by Atari. Now, this is an awesome racer where you must shoot the cars and pick up fuel, and it's all set in a futuristic world, and it's just so much fun and worthy of your time. I love playing this at Arcade Club or on MAME at home. Yeah, I think it does appear on one of the Midway packs as well. I'm going from memory there, but I'm pretty sure it appears in one of those in the Xbox and PS2 era, that is. Now, of course, there's the other Road Blaster, totally unrelated, but came out in 1985 by Data East. And if you love your Laserdisc games, this is a lot of fun, because instead of the typical things you get with Laserdisc, you're doing racing of cars, but it's all beautiful manga anime art style, and it's gorgeous. And of course, it was made so famous because it was a pack-in game with a Mega CD, or Sega CD as the Americans know it, and for a lot of people that's a great one. Talking of similar sounding names, Road Burners by Atari in 1999 is a real nice one to play that people don't talk of much these days. It's a motorbiking game, as you can see, and it's got gorgeous graphics. It's one I think should be played by more. In fact, I think the later Atari games, they do need a bit more love. Now, actually, there were so many awesome racing games on the letter R. I mean, Radical Bikers by Gallico in 1999. I just adore this game. I mean, it was licensed to Atari as well. Amazing. It's part Crazy Taxi, it's part Road Rash, it's all fun. I love the music, and the concept. Instead of like picking up passengers like you do in Crazy Taxi, you're delivering a pizza, and you've got to beat the rival pizza company to get there first. It's full of humour, and the music is fantastic. It's kind of like a advertisement for the pizza delivery company you're working for. It's got this great rock track. It's just brilliant. I adore it. And it's one, thankfully, it does play on MAME, although it's better on Technoparrot. Technoparrot can run it better. I think also it did appear, I might be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure it appeared on the EverDrive. But that probably is, the EverDrive console in one of the packs. But that's probably the PS1 version they're running there, not the arcade one. But the PS1 version is fantastic as well. It's a great port. Anyway, sorry, I must rush on. Talking of hidden gems, though, for racing, Racing Hero by Sega in 1989 is just wonderful. It's amazing, given how beloved Sega is, that very few people actually know about this arcade racer. It's one of the last sprite scaling games by Sega, and it's got an Outrun meets Super Hang-On because you're on a bike. I adore this game. It's wonderful to play. As you can see, MAME runs it perfectly, and this is another reason why Sega, you need to come out with more of your games, more of your back catalogue. You've got so many fantastic games you're just doing nothing with, and I think people would love to see them again. They deserve to be played again. But for now, on MAME, give it a try today. You won't be disappointed. Now, another racing classic by Sega is, of course, Radmobile. And they also did Rallymobile as well. I won't bother showing both. Now, this came out in 1991, and probably most famous today being the first time that Sonic was introduced, because he's a little hanging keychain on the car that you're driving. But this was pretty much the last racer to use sprites in the arcade before 3D truly took over. It is sad, and this is great. It plays wonderful in the arcade. It's one that sadly isn't in any of, well, certainly not in Bury or Blackpool for arcade clubs. So I have played it at some of the retro events that you get, like at Play Expo and things. But it's a fun game, but one that doesn't really play that well on, unless you've got like the right equipment for the steering wheel. It doesn't really play that well in the home on MAME. It's just too sensitive. It's so difficult to get it just right. I think Arcade 1-Up also had this as well in one of their cabinets, but sadly I haven't got the space to fit that in. Another one that's a big hitter for racing, of course, is Race Driving. This came out in 1990 by Atari, and it's a sequel to Hard Driving, of course. It's more of the same really, but you get 4 car types, 4 tracks, including the super stunt track, along with the 2 of the original. It's fun. There's nothing wrong with it, but by 1990 the excitement of 3D in racing games was starting to wane. There were better examples coming out even in the home, at that point. Particularly, by the time it got to 92 and things like that, you had much better examples of 3D games coming out. So I mean, they're racing, but I mean, of course, there's many genres you can mention that are big hitters. Probably amazing that some of these didn't hit my top 5, but I'll explain the reasons why. There's Renegade, of course, released by 1986 by Technos and licensed to Taito. This was a revolutionary game. It's undeniable. It was a thing that molded what scrolling beat-em-ups were, and naturally inspired their later, more successful game, many would say, of Double Dragon. Of course, it's using the Kunio Neketsu high school style characters, and they look great here. It's definitely a draw, but I do struggle with weird controls. You have to sort of like do the direction and the attack. I think it's probably better in the home, this one, for me personally, just because they simplified the controls a bit. And of course, I adore the sequel, which looked nothing like Target Renegade, but technically it was the spiritual sequel, but only done in the home. Now, another game out there that also came out in 1986 was Rolling Thunder. Clearly heavily inspired, this game heavily inspired Shinobi a year later. But this was developed by NAMCO, and it has you run and gun infinite swathes of enemy, and I love the cool jumping over the banister to get to higher platforms, and you dive into doors to get your power-ups like you do with elevator action and games of that ilk. Yeah, I mean, I love this game, but I do find it rock hard, and the infinite spawning enemies stresses me out. That's probably why it didn't make it here. Now, I actually prefer its sequel, Rolling Thunder 2, released 1991. I mean, it was years later. Now, I guess this is more of the same, but it's got much more varied locales. You can choose different characters as well, which is nice. And I think it's better balanced than the original. And the Mega Drive port is really, really good of the sequel. It adds in additional stages to the arcade version. Now, another big hitter worthy of mention is, of course, the Atari Return of the Jedi. Now, after the amazing Atari Vector, Star Wars, and of course the upgrade kit for Empire Strikes Back, the sudden weird shift to pixel art in 1984 for Return of the Jedi was jarring, to say the least. I mean, it's quite an ugly game, really, and very weird they chose isometric viewpoint. It's not really a good game, if I'm honest. I mean, if it didn't have Star Wars slapped on it, it probably would have been long forgotten. But I do find it playing it more than I should, probably because it is Star Wars. It goes from an isometric sort of speed bike race through the Ewok village, and it's kind of cool going through the traps and the Ewoks capturing the enemies, the stormtroopers in this case, or scout troopers, after, as they're chasing after you. It's kind of cool. And then you get to the village, and then it's got the second section, which is you're in the Millennium Falcon, also isometric, and you're with Lando Calrissian, and you fly into the Death Star, destroy the central core, and escape before all the explosions, all of it sort of dodging all the pipes and things. And then it repeats, and there's it's basically the same thing, but there's more things you can do. The landscape changes, like you can go through for extra points, hollowed out tree trunks and things to get extra points. Is it one I would recommend if you're coming in it cold? No, but it's a Star Wars game, and it's not without its charms. And of course, this is another one if you want to legally try it. It is on the second, I always forget the name of it, the Rebel Strike, the second one that was on the GameCube. All three of the Atari Star Wars collections is on there as a hidden game. I mean, they don't do things like that now, so that's a great way to play it if you can, because you can usually pick that up quite cheaply. But yeah, awesome game. Now, another fondly loved big hitter, also released in 1986, is of course Rampage. Now, this was made by Midway and has you control one of 3 giant monsters. There's a King Kong style ape called George, a Godzilla-like lizard called Lizzie, or a giant werewolf called Ralph. Now, the purpose of the game is to destroy all the buildings by climbing up and punching the buildings and eat all the people and things around you attacking you. It's such a unique idea, and it's so much fun. Everybody wants to be the monster when you're watching Godzilla or what have you. For the time, even now, it's got gorgeous graphics with oodles of humour. Midway was so far ahead of the curve with their graphics in this era. You even think of Tapper and things like that. But gameplay-wise, it does get repetitive. Now, years later, in 1997, they did a sequel called Rampage World Tour. It's better graphics, but it just misses something. I don't know what it is. It's got more variety, but it's missing the charm of the original, and it's one that I probably won't go back to play. Now, another famous game that I don't particularly enjoy is Rally X, released in 1980. This has you run around a maze in a car collecting flags while avoiding the other car enemies. Now, experts back in the day, they thought this was going to be the hot new game, not Pac-Man, also by NAMCO, and they put all their efforts towards this game. Now, how wrong were they in predicting? Because, of course, we know how well Pac-Man did. Now, another game that is great is, of course, Atari's 1990 fun, unique game, Rampart. Now, this is probably the first ever tower defense game, really. You place cannons in your tower and you blast the attacking ships. Then use random Tetris-like blocks to quickly rebuild your castle walls in the limited time that you have, making sure that you seal up, otherwise you'll lose. You have to completely surround your castle, not leaving any holes. It's probably better known today for its wonderful home ports. The Lynx had a fantastic version, of course, the Amiga, and most consoles and things had pretty good versions of it as well. It is a lot of fun, but it probably works better as a multiplayer game. It's not one that I don't often go back to, if I'm honest. Now, one game fondly loved, but I don't particularly gel with, of course, is Rygar. Now, Rygar is released in 1987, developed by Tecmo. The game has infinite enemies coming at you, and you take them out with your rotating blade attached to a chain. And, undeniably, the game is quite addictive, but for me, it just gets repetitive so quickly, and that's why it's not on here. Another game loved by quite a few people was Atari's 1986 game, Roadrunner, based on the Looney Tunes cartoon. This has you run along roads, eating seeds and avoiding Wile E. Coyote. Interesting, originally it was going to be this Laserdisc mixing in additional cartoon clips in the game, but it was cut due to costs. What's there is okay, it's fun, I guess. I just don't really enjoy the gameplay personally. I find it frustrating of having to pick up, and Roadrunner's really difficult to control. Now, for the letter R, had as many amazing shooters, and there's some additional standout game and series to call out for the letter R. Nintendo's 1980 game, Radar Scope, is perhaps more famous for its failing than the game itself. You see, Nintendo of America were just starting out, and they asked Nintendo to make a game suited for the American audience. And this was the game they produced. And it initially tested well, with Nintendo of America ordering big numbers of the game. They were convinced it was going to be an all-time hit. But by the time it had gone through manufacturing and being shipped across, gamers' interest in shooters has started to wane, with Pac-Man being released and the hot new title. Suddenly, shooters were passé. So, unable to sell these radar scope machines and fearing serious bankruptcy, Nintendo of America sent an SOS to Japan, saying that they needed a new game to put on and swap out the artwork so they could somehow sell all these radar scope cabinets that just were never going to sell and get off their lot, basically. And the game, of course, that Nintendo Japan came up with was Donkey Kong. And, despite US employees swearing and storming off when they saw that nonsensical name, Donkey Kong undeniably turned out to be a massive hit and one of Nintendo's biggest hits of all time, in the arcades at least. As to the game Radar Scope, it's got a nice 3D effect and it plays pretty well. But you can see when up against NAMCO and many shooters of the day, you can see why it didn't woo the game-playing public in the same way. Still, it's an interesting one to play today, and it's fascinating that this was the game that nearly bankrupted Nintendo of America. Now, another great shooting series is, of course, Raiden. Now, that means thunder and lightning in Japanese, fans. And, the first in the series, 1990, by Seibu Gahatsu Incorporated, SKI, and it has you fly fighter plane, taking out all the enemies, and it's got fantastic upgradable weaponry that lets you thwart the alien invasion that's going on. And I love this game. It's got bright, bold colours, and it's just an awesome vertical shooter. Its sequel, Raiden 2, released in 1993, is also great fun, with you taking out the second wave of the alien invasion after taking out the first. It's fun and it's tough, like the original. So I do prefer probably the remixed version of the game, and that's probably Raiden's DX, released in 1994 in the China region. Now this takes the best bits of the first two games and gives gamers a great version of the Raiden games, and it's probably my preferred game over the first two titles. Just has so many extra improvements and gameplay tweaks and smoothing that difficulty curve that makes it worth it. Now also of note is Raiden 2, released in 1996. That's different from the 1993 version. This remixes the levels of the second game, but it smooths that difficulty ramp, it reorders things, and it just makes it a more fun game. Now at this point you've got the spin-off series in 1996 with Raiden Fighters. This is an evolution of the Raiden series with loads of planes to pilot, more screen action, crazier weaponry and funky techno-inspired music. It's a great game. And the following year, in 1997, they released the Raiden Fighters 2 with more planes to pilot and upping everything else further. Incidentally, they did release in 2000 on cheaper hardware called Raiden Fighters 2 2000 Operation Helldiver. But even better was in 1998 with Raiden Fighter Jet. This has an amazing roster of craft to pilot now, and it's got wonderful level designs, and it's just a complete joy to play today. And I'm so thankful Arcade Club in Bury has this game, because it's a really special, one of my favourites of the Raiden series. Now in 2005, the company now doing the Raiden series was Moss, and they continued with Raiden 3. Now this is a great update to the series and a huge amount of fun. And I like all the Raiden games really, I recommend them. And finally, for the arcades at least, they released in 2007 Raiden 4. Now this was, as I mentioned, the last one released at the arcades, and it's a great version. I love any of them that came out in the Raiden series. There just isn't a bad one. Now, after the arcades, of course, there was Raiden 5, but I'm not going to show them here because that only came out on Xbox One and later on the PC with the Director's Cut. I mean, overall, it's a great series with many ways to play these games today, such as the fantastic Raiden Legacy Collection on Steam, for example. Now, the versions I'm showing here is the main versions. I just like it because it can do better overlays and things for because it's a gaming PC, but there's amazing sort of other ways of playing this game. Now, another amazing shooter series is, of course, the RAVE series by Taito. Now, RAVE came out in 1994. It's the first game in the series, and it's a fantastic title with a main laser and a locking on homing missile secondary weapon. And it's so addictive, sort of like locking on to all those enemies, and then you press the missile button and take them all out in one go. It's just a very cool mechanic that doesn't get old. Now, incidentally, in Japan, this is known as Layer's Section, or the first game, bizarrely, in the West is known as Galactic Attack. So very, very confusing with this first game. But it did appear on Taito Legends 2 on the Xbox and PC compilations, but bizarrely not on the PS2 version. And incidentally, this series is coming onto the Switch soon as a compilation pack. I'm already ordered and I can't wait for it. Now, the sequel, Raystorm, was released in 1996 and goes, sadly in some ways, to 3D. I do love pixel art and sprites. Now, it does, as I mentioned, lose some of that charm going to 3D, but it's still undeniably a fabulous shooter and well worthy of your time. Now, the Saturn and PS1 consoles had a great port of this game. It's known as Layer Section 2 in Japan. And also, this appeared in the PS2 version of Taito Legends 2, but frustratingly not on the Xbox and Windows version. I don't know why they put the first game in the series only on Xbox and the second game in the series only on PS2, but that's what they did. And finally, we come to the third game in the series, and that's, of course, Ray Crisis, released in 1998, and it's a nice conclusion to the series. Now, technically, it is a prequel, as you're up against the supercomputer that the whole story's about. Never really bothered with stories and shooters. Now, this does use pre-rendered 3D backgrounds to great effect. It does mean if you're playing on MAME, you'll need the CHD file, the hard drive file, as well as the ROM. But it is well worth it. It uses fantastic speech that's constantly going through, and it's a great follow-on and conclusion to this shoot 'em up series. But it's not just shooters in the letter R. There's also some fantastic, great fighters and beat-em-ups that I've left off the list. Examples of Real Bout Fatal Fury by S&K in 1995. Now, this is a continuation of the Fatal Fury series, being the fourth in that series. And, you know, like those, it offers you to do that rotating as you fight, which gives literally a whole new dimension to the fighting game for sprite-based fighting games. And I think it works very, very well, but I understand why they sort of decided to drop it moving forward on a lot of other series. It's a lot of work to do and can get quite confusing. But I think this is really good, and they, you know, one of the nice things with Real about Fatal Fury, they did bring in some of the earlier fighters of the series again, so it's well worth it from that regard. There's a lot of favourites here that show in the game. Now, the sequel in 1997 was Real Bout Fatal Fury Special. Okay, so a halfway house to the sequel. This is a sixth version in the Fatal Fury series. Now, I haven't just skipped one there. The reason is the fifth one in the series is Garou Mark of the Wolf games. Of course, we covered that in the letter G. This is the same as the first Real Bout Fury game, but it extends the roster even further with 20 fighters. So it's more of the same, but well worthy of your time. It's probably the one to go to for the first game. Now, the sequel, the true sequel, is Real Bout Fatal Fury 2. The Newcomers. Now, this came out in 1998, and it adds 2 more characters to the rosters and a few gameplay tweaks, but you know, it's not really a big all-announced sequel. It's more of an add-on as far as I'm concerned. Now, Capcom fighters, you know, that seldom get talked about today is Ring of Destruction, Slam Masters 2. Now, this came out in 1994, and again mixes wrestling with Capcom fighting mechanics like the first game, which we haven't covered yet because it's under the letter S, being Slam Masters. But it's a great game. I mean, it's unlicensed wrestlers, which is a bit of a shame because I would have loved to have seen Capcom do a WWF 2D fighting game. I think it would have been such a hit, and I still would like them to do it today. Here's a calling out Capcom, please, please, please. But you know, even though it's unlicensed, there's a lot of parodies or pastiches, probably a better description, of fighters that you know. And one of the cool things is Hagar from Final Fight, you know, the scrolling 2D beat 'em up, is in this game because of course he is a wrestler. So that's awesome as well, that you get to do wrestling fighting with him. Yeah, fun game and well worthy of playing. Now, whilst of course I chose ROBOCOP as one of my top 5 choices, it's also worth noting there was a sequel, ROBOCOP 2 obviously, released in 1991 by Data East. Now, like the film, it's lacking something. They've gone more platformy, it's got chunkier graphics, but it's just missing the fun and the gameplay of the original. I don't know quite what it is, but it's definitely not right, and therefore it's not surprising it never saw a home port. Now, the people who are involved with this, they also did that Night Slashers game, which I shouted out in letter N, and a lot of them did the Midnight Resistance as well, which is of course another favourite by many people. But much better than the ROBOCOP 2 is Robo Army, released in SNK and came out in 1991. Now, this has beautiful, huge, bold graphics, and it's got that wonderful Neo Geo color palette. I mean, this is a beat 'em up needed to be played by more. No one ever talks about it, and for me, it's a real hidden gem. Plays fantastically well. Now, talking of hidden gems, let's finish off this huge long episode with a stack of hidden gems on the letter R that I have yet to cover. A good example was Rapid Hero, released by NMK in 1994. This is a great vertical shooter, and it's by the team that brought you Thunder Dragon and Zed Blade, and it's really really worthy of your time. I mean, I recommend this. It's one that never gets talked about, and it's a great vertical shooter. Another fantastic shooter slash racer, if you like, is Radical Radial. I mean, what a fantastic name that is. This is a 1982 vertical shooter by Nichibitsu, and I love it. You're in a huge wheel with a gun, and you've got to sort of not only shoot the enemies that are coming down at waves at you, but also you're on the ground, so you're negotiating terrain and you can jump over the terrain. It's really addictive, this, and it's a fantastic one to try. Again, it's another one that nobody ever talks about. Another fantastic one is 1985 Repulse. Actually, I did cover this by its other name of 99 The Last War, but this is the original title that Sega had given before it was picked up. I mean, I'm going to shout out again here because, again, I think it's awesome. It's a nice shooter, and you get a great sense of progression as you go from planet to planet defending Earth. So it's a great idea, I think. Now, Ryojin is another shooter that nobody ever talks about. I mean, it's made by Taito in 1993, and it's a top blaster. I mean, I think people really enjoy this. Please, give it a go. And talking of really good games, if you're a fan of Cabal, then NMK's 1992 game, Riot, is a fantastic game in the similar mould. And it's even better in some ways, because one of the things you have to do is change directions. So you've got enemies in front of you and behind you. I'm talking on on the looking of the plane. So you can flip. So 1 minute you're shooting people in front of you, and then you have to turn around and shoot by pressing a button, and you're shooting the people behind you. It's a great addition, and I love the little nod to a dead Robocop in the opening level. I don't know what beef they had with the Data East team, couldn't find it out, but it's fantastic nevertheless. Now, Riding Fight is another Taito arcade game that never ever gets talked about. Nobody probably even knows this one. It's a real shame because it's riding on a hoverboard and fighting like you do in Road Rash. So it's a great combination, I think, and it's a total blast to play, and really one that I highly, highly recommend. Now, I've included this. It's an American football game. I'll be honest, it's a sport I've never really understood. Seems to always stop and start whenever I watch it, but undeniably, if you're a fan of the sport, unlike me, Konami's 1997 game called Rushing Heroes, it certainly looks the part. It's got gorgeous graphics, and I think it's a really good arcade American football game. I just don't know what the hell I'm doing. Now, Konami did some other great arcade sport games that nobody ever talks about. And these I have a lot more affinity with and fun. Run and Gun is a brilliant basketball title. Now, as default on main, it will show the two screens, but if you go in the settings, you can just choose to look at one player. And the reason is because in the original, you actually had an arcade cabinet with two screens, which was quite cool. So both players could see exactly what was going on at the same time from their perspective. Now, it came out in 1993, and it's just a really fun game. I mean, I put it up there with as good as NBA Jam, and I'm a huge fan of NBA Jam Tournament Edition, so for me that's high praise indeed. Definitely, give it a go. And likewise, its sequel in 1996 called Run and Gun 2. Okay, it's more of the same, but it's nicer visuals, gameplay improvements, and this is also a fantastic joy to play as well. So there we have it. I mean, there's tons of great games for the letter R. I mean, this is a huge, long episode. And it was a tough letter to choose from with so many great games. But you think this video was long? You wait till the letter S in the next episode. My word, that's going to be a long one. Haven't even started with that, but it's going to be eye-watering, I just know. But so much fun playing through so many classics. So, as I mentioned, don't forget to check my sister channel I'm doing with the guys for the RGDS podcast, as well as the audio podcasts that we do, which I'd love for you to listen to. I've been doing it for years now. But there's also recently we set up a RGDS podcast YouTube channel. I'll put the links in. There's so much more additional content there. I probably put most of my efforts on there as well moving forward, because I love the idea. It's not just me, although mostly a lot of the videos are just me at the moment, but it's a collaboration, not just with fellow hosts on the audio podcast, but also some of our listeners as well, and etc. have been doing uploads of games. So I'd love if you could take a look there. One of the things that's quite nice, we're trying to build up a recommend list, but using the playlist. So rather than do long plays, I've done, usually it's life or one playthrough, and it's usually me playing it badly because it's playing it the first playthrough. But what we're doing is using playlists to build up a list of recommended games. So I think that's quite cool, because you get the option to go, okay, show me racers, and you'll get recommended racers against any platform on that playlist, or show me platformers. But equally, it's done by system as well. So if you've got your Game Boy, fully loaded Game Boy or something like that, and you're thinking, I don't know what to play, there's a stack of examples, or Dreamcast, or whatever system it is. And I know that's been quite nice for people, because I tend not to choose the big hitters all the time. The ones known, I tend to try and choose obscure gems. So there's a lot of hidden gems there for people to enjoy. Well, there you go. It's been a long episode, but hopefully one you really, really enjoy. So until next time, keep it retro.